Good evening and welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting. We'll move to the first agenda item, which is apologies for absence. We've got all 10 of our team here today, so please there's no absence. Record of decision. Are colleagues content that I sign the record of the 5th of September?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Item 3, any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest and other significant interests? Any interests? No, we're not very interesting tonight. I remind colleagues, of course, we've got item 11 and 12 where there are confidential papers. I don't believe there's an intention to go into closed session, but of course we need to recognise they are there. Let's then move on to the first substantive item from tonight. Then that's the medium-term financial outlook 23 to 2028. This has already had some high level of interest, as people would imagine. We find ourselves as an incoming cabinet in a difficult situation. There's no doubt of that. We knew that was likely to be the case when we put ourselves forward for election on May the 4th and the people of Medway gave us the opportunity to serve. But in the last 125 or so days, we've found more financial pressures that we've had to deal with, whether that's the fleet of waste bins, whether that is the Brook Theatre or many other issues as well. So the current position for our in-year pressures are clear. They're in paragraph 4.4, and we obviously have taken those at a previous cabinet meeting for quarter one. We'll be bringing back quarter two in due course in November, and we'll be looking at very carefully to see what happens with the number. We want that, of course, to come down as quickly as we can. But even if we manage to get that number down as quickly as we can and we end up with a positive fiscal situation for this year, which will be a challenge, we should not be under any illusions. We will have to continue to make difficult decisions as an administration, decisions which the previous administration didn't do. They chose to use reserves on a number of years to balance their budget and then overspend subsequently. So we will look forward not just to fixing this year's Conservative budget, but we will build our budget next February. But we do that with the backdrop of this stark but realistic document we see tonight. And I want to say a couple of things very directly to the people of Medway. It is right that we, as a Cabinet, receive a report with the risk register on it, recognising that if we as a Cabinet and a Council did nothing, there would be a risk of our position being that, as we've seen at other councils across the country. Of course, we have shown in our first few months of administration, we get on and do stuff. We make a difference. We're doing that day in, day out. So it's right that that's shown there, but it's also right to say very clearly tonight as a Cabinet, we are going to get on and make those difficult decisions and make sure that as we move forward throughout the term of this administration and the term of this outlook, we get those financials into a better place. We'll be doing some stuff, of course, internally, but there is a need to lobby nationally as well. And as the report clearly says, in paragraph 5.3, it talks about the F20. Now, some people may not have heard of the F20. That is a group of 20 councils, cross-party, not just one particular party, who have amongst the lowest levels of income from central government. You know, that grant that we need desperately. And colleagues and residents would have heard us talk about the 91% cut we've had as a council since 2010 in, for example, our revenue support grant. So we'll be working closely with them. And one of the things we'll be doing is writing to our other 19 colleagues in that group, saying, actually, we don't think we're alone in these pressures, and we need to send a strong collective voice to central government, whoever is in charge both now and throughout the period of this medium-term financial outlook, to say local government deserves better and Medway deserves better. So we're working closely with them. We'll also be working closely with sector support, so the LGA for us as members, organisations like SITFA and SOLAS for senior officers, you know, getting that best practice, getting those examples of where we can do all that we can to bring about the positive changes in the financial outlook. And we'll also be lobbying directly. You know, this set of numbers we see in front of us the pressures we have as a result of the last 13 years of underfunding by the current and previous governments. We need to be taking that argument directly to them as well. So we will be doing that. So those are three very clear actions the Cabinet as will be taking forward. The F20 collective voice of local government, working with our sector support colleagues and contacting and working directly, hoping for support from DLUC. I always live in hope, despite their records with our administration so far. And the final thing I'll say before I throw it open to colleagues is this. One of the paragraphs in there, really importantly, is around public consultation. And that's really important. Look, in opposition, as we were for a number of years, I was very critical of the previous administration's failure to consult the public. So we will go through that process. We're working on that now. There's some models we've seen other councils bringing forward, and I'll be speaking with colleagues and others as we start to firm that up. Residents understand where we are. I've had a number of conversations with residents, and when I've got taxi drivers stopping me and asking me about Section 114 notices, you know the public are understanding not only what we're having to deal with, but how we've ended up here as well. So the recommendation tonight is obviously to just note the forecast and the pressures that come from that, but of course there are a number of actions I've outlined there which we'll be taking forward alongside that. Happy to take any questions. I'll take Nashaba, then Teresa. Nashaba.
Thanks, Vince. And I think I just wanted to put on the record, the fact that I find it really reassuring that we are having that coordinated response, which is going to national government. I think the fact that we are in this situation has happened over a long period of time. It's disappointing that previous administrations were reluctant to follow up with governments, perhaps because of their political colours, about saying this isn't good enough, because as a upper tier authority trying to deliver some core statutory services, it is a really challenging time when 91% of your budget is taken away over that period. And it's disappointing that national government have tended to sort of bury their heads in the sand. And, as we've said, there are other authorities who have gone down some very difficult routes when it's come to this. And I'm sure that I'm aware of other authorities now who are in a very, very difficult position of all political colours. So the fact that the national government, who have chronically underfunded local government for that period of time and not willing to say, we've got this wrong, has to be called out and has to be questioned, because this isn't just about balancing our books. This is about the residents of Medway and about the services that are there for them and the support. And as we go into a cost of living crisis, those issues, and as we continue in a cost of living crisis, those concerns are getting, worse and worse by the day. And I do not understand how we have a national government who isn't willing to share their burden of the responsibility on this, whereas they've placed a number of authorities in a very similar position. I'm pleased that we're now taking that action, that we're working with other authorities to kind of put forward our case, and I just wish that the previous administration had done that sooner, rather than relying on reserves to balance the budget, because what they've done is left us in a really, really difficult and dangerous situation that we now have to fix.
Thank you. Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. And look, those actions that Nashaba's referred to were quite deliberate on the part of national government. They came in 2010, leaping into the caveat left by the world financial crisis to run a vindictive and highly politicised austerity regime that, as Vince said, has taken 91% of our budget. I want to talk about adult social care, and it's reassuring, Nashaba, absolutely, that we're taking these actions and we're not on our own. Last week I was at the LGA and I saw Sheila Norris, who's the CEO of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Care. And she was very, very clear where the blame for the situation lies. The sector has lost £1.8 billion in government cuts. 75% of adult social care departments say they're not confident they can deliver their statutory services. There are 500,000 people waiting for social care reviews and new people coming forward with increased mental health problems, homelessness and domestic abuse. And in that context, locally, our staff are coping with a recurring £6 million overspend because they have lost £15 million locally. So in addition to the actions that we're taking for lobbying, I am really pleased with the way that the staff have responded to our different way of doing things. to identifying priorities that cut right across the cabinet and working together and coming forward with some really innovative ideas. There's no doubt in my mind for the statutory services, we have to invest to save, we have to look at longer term budgeting, find ways to show that the actions we take will result in cash-based savings further down the line. We can't keep doing short-term things. And I'm afraid the rhetoric that comes out of the government saying we've put more money into adult social care through the Better Care Fund, yes, they have. But all that has done is absorbed inflation. And you can see that if we actually, in the report, if we really did pay the better, the fair cost of care, we'd have another £1.3 million on our overspend. And actually, I publicly thank all of the care providers who are working with us, suffering from the cost of living crisis themselves, who have accepted that we can't give them the uplift that they need. And that's the same for all of the people working in adult social care, particularly those who work in domiciliary care and in care homes. They deserve better wages. They are looking after the most vulnerable people in our society, and they haven't had uplifts of that go anywhere, anything like to meet the cost of inflation. So we're in a tough situation, but there's enormous resilience and innovation and determination amongst council officers. And I'm really pleased to say that they are coming forward with ideas. I'll be looking forward to bringing the Care for Medway paper to Cabinet, thinking about the way that we deal with these pressures long term. And I want to reassure everybody who's watching and everybody in Medway that there's determination across the corporate management team, from all of our staff. I was out with a social worker today doing an assessment, and her determination, her pleasure actually at saying that she feels supported by her managers and listened to by us, didn't prompt her to say that, that's what she told me, was really encouraging, even though she's got a high caseload and we went along to see a very complex case. So that kind of resilience, determination, enthusiasm, someone who has taken a permanent job at Medway, trusted us to give her a good career. There are good things happening, but this is a shocking situation, and I'm afraid the previous administration were lazy, complacent and capricious as far as budgeting was concerned, plundering the reserves, and in the first 10 years taking everything the then Labour government would give them without much effort at all. So going to do things differently. I do feel optimistic, but that does not cloud the difficulties that we face. And of course, for staff hearing all of this, that must be quite frightening. And I want to reassure them that we're working together to do everything that we can.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Lauren.
Thanks, Vince. Like others, I think there are a couple of reasons why we're in this situation. The first reason and the strongest reason is undoubtedly because since 2010, successive Conservative-led governments have cut our revenue support grant by 91%. When you think that in 2010 we had £85 million to deliver vital public services that our residents rely on, and this year we've been given 7.3 million. That is a central government that is asking local authorities like us to operate the services that our residents rely on a shoestring. And it's even worse when you look at where we are in terms of inflation, in terms of the costs that we're having to incur. The cut is even sharper. The second reason, though, I don't think that the previous administration can get away from, is that they did not take the best financial decisions, particularly in terms of some of the buildings that we own, which meant that we as a new administration had to borrow money for things like the Brook Theatre, which we would not have chosen to do. And that is putting pressure on our revenue budget. So that decision not to manage the stock that the buildings that we as a council own and manage is a direct contributor to the situation that we find ourselves in now. I think they also deferred tough decisions, and as Teresa has said, they relied on the reserves, and unfortunately now we're at crunch time where those reserves have run out. But others have said, we as a new administration will obviously do everything that we can to avoid that Section 114 process, and are working very closely with officers on that. I think as elected representatives who are living in the communities that we represent, it's much better that we are the ones taking those tough decisions rather than an army of Whitehall bureaucrats coming in. But it's obviously going to be a very difficult process, and I welcome the decision to work closely with other councils who are in a similar situation to us, as Nashaba said, of all political parties, to argue for a proper long-term funding settlement to local government. And certainly in my portfolio area as well, we have to be focused in the short term on balancing the books, undoubtedly, but there is also a medium to longer term picture where in my area we can look at how we can invest and work differently to support economic growth, because that is also part of the picture. It's not just about cuts, it's also about how we grow the economy here in Medway in a way that is beneficial for the council and then ultimately beneficial for our residents as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Lauren. I agree with everything my three colleagues have said. You know, these are difficult times, there's no doubt of that. But we were clear before the election that we would have to take tough decisions. We knew that would be the case. And as the paper shows quite clearly, that conversation in paragraph 5.3, pages 18 and 19, you can see there directly the level of funding, the average core spending power, you know, £1,377 for some boroughs, the F20 authorities £919. You can see the differential there. So it's right, and we'll lead the charge with our 19 colleagues. We'll make the argument on that cross-party basis to say, actually, we deserve a fairer deal. The 20 councils do, but more importantly than that, the residents of Medway do. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the formal recommendation along, as I say, with the three actions of DLUC, sector support and the F20 letter and other work alongside them. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, colleagues. Let's move on to a slightly more upbeat report. Adam, over to you on the Ofsted inspection of local authority children's services known as ILACs.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vince. And I'm not wanting to not acknowledge the mood from the earlier item, and I will be alluding to that later on, just when I say a few words about this judgment that we've had. But can I just say first of all how thrilled I am that Medway Council has been adjudged to provide good and effective children's social care services. Now, this is a massive improvement from 2019, the last time Ofsted came to inspect our these services, which is children's social care. That was in 2019, and unfortunately we were then judged to be inadequate. So there's been a hell of a lot of work that's gone on. There's been a lot of investment as well, so that links into the earlier item about how we weren't being funded by central government, but also we've had to prioritise within our own resources. But the work has paid off because we've now arrived at a situation whereby children matter in Medway. So the impact of the work that's been going on means that that is very much the case. There's still some work to be done. Obviously, one of the four categories there, which was about children who need help and protection, that's still judged to be requires improvement. But experiences and progress of children in care were judged by Ofsted to be good. Obviously, the experience and progress also of care leavers, our care leavers within Medway, was judged to be good. And probably the most important of all, which has really driven everything throughout this, it's been the impact of our leaders, as well as our staff, on social work practice. And that has been judged to be good, because that's really had that impact on children and families. I've alluded to the fact that there's still more to do, but I do share, Vince, your ambition that we should be working over the next few years, not to rest on our laurels, but to work towards working towards outstanding services. There's no reason why we should take our foot off the accelerator, but there's a lot of consolidating that needs to go on. Ofsted are out of our hair for the first time, so we're going to have to recalibrate how we have our meetings, etc., and where we place our priorities. We did take time last week to actually celebrate the news, because there's a lot of bad news at the moment, but it wasn't just celebrating the news of all the work that the staff have done, because they have put in a lot of work, but it's the work which they've done which has made an impact on children and families, some of whom are in very tough circumstances, not least because cost of living, etc., and like all of that. So I do, and this goes back to the first comment which I meant, I absolutely acknowledge all of the pressures that we've got on our budget just to get through to the end of this year, let alone next year, and that's so on. But I have to say that Medway in the past has had a corporate history of, unfortunately, stripping out investment in children's social care services every time we've got ourselves out of a particular jam. So, and I would caution, obviously, colleagues and obviously people listening, that if we did do that again, and it would be very tempting to do that because we've got all these challenges to our budget, make no mistake, we won't have another chance. Children's services will be taken away from us whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So those services, of course, would still be provided, but we would not be providing them, and we'd be having to pay for them at an extra cost as well, which is not what we want to do. I do recognise the political leadership of my predecessor in the previous administration, Josie Isles.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is, however, significant, though, that Medway has moved to good for the first time under a Labour and cooperative administration, and I take pleasure in saying that as well. That's not to say that, obviously we've been in administration for a small amount of time, but I think Ofsted inspectors were equally wanting to know how we were going to be moving forward, and that would have had an impact on the judgment if they'd found that we weren't going to be doing what they want us, would like to hear us to do. So I'd like to thank colleague councillors as well, because many of them have been investing a small part of their ward improvement funds towards the Time to Shine presentation event, which is going to be for Medway's Children in Care on the 7th of December, and this will be making presentations to children in care for some of the amazing achievements which they've been, involved in. And so, finally, I say that I move and note this report with pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Colleague, I'll take Tracy and Teresa. Tracy?
I'd like to echo what Adam said and say thank you so much to the whole Children's Services team. It's no mean feat to move from inadequate to good in the space of 4 years, and it just shows the determination and effort that has been put into making things better for children in Medway. Looking at the key findings, there's some really key points here. We state that services for children and families in Medway have substantially improved since the inspection in 2019. There is now a strong, determined and cohesive leadership team. So many good things in here, in particular that children matter for Medway. The journey's not over. We've still got really a lot of work to do. And again, we do come back to this budget statement earlier. We need to keep up this investment. It's no good doing this yo-yo of getting to good and then deciding to put your funds elsewhere, which has happened in the past, and we can't allow that to happen. We know that there's a lot of work to do, and we know that the Children's Services team have very accurately and honestly identified where there is still weaknesses and where we still need to put that effort in. It's pleasing too to see that it was recognised in the Ofsted report that the new corporate and political leadership have given their ongoing commitment and support to the continual improvement journey of children's services. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when we say that we will continue with that support all the way through to outstanding with the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tracy. Teresa?
Thank you, and I think it's important, I echo the words of Adam and Tracy, and I thank you both for the effort that you've put in since we took over the administration, because it was obviously a very, very delicate time. And I thank our director, Leanne Farrett, because under her leadership, things have changed. I remember that awful day in 2019 when we were called to a briefing at 8:30 in the morning, and we heard that 45 children in Medway were not safe. That was a terrible day. And the reason that those children were not safe is because eyes had been taken off the ball. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And the people who were shocked about it, including the political administration, should not have been shocked. They should have had their eyes on those things and not let it happen. Now, I pay tribute to Josie Isles because she took over a very difficult position at that time. And I think that she was very sincere in her determination to change things around. But having said that, she was surrounded by people who had let things drop. And we have given our assurance and, our very sincere promises that we will never let something like that happen again. And it was lovely to be at the celebration. I think one of the things that was most striking about it is that you saw children's services, right across the spectrum. We saw people there from early help who come in when families first have problems and try to prevent things from going wrong. We saw trainee social workers who haven't worked with Medway for very long, social workers who have been here for a very long time, and their managers and leaders all celebrating together and supporting each other and really enjoying that day. And I do thank you, Richard, for making sure that that happened, because it was great to see everybody together and good to see them patting themselves and one another on the back. And we can learn a lot from that. We've got the Care Quality Commission coming down the track to look at adult social care. There's lots of good practice. We need to mirror the improvement board that went on and should stay there for children's services, because improvement is continuous. We can always absolutely do better for our children, whoever they are, including asylum-seeking children. So this is something really good for Medway, and of course it sends a very good message to people who want to come and work here, that this is an authority who can deliver good services and has got the willingness to deliver more, become outstanding. So all of those things are incredibly important, and it's right that we recognise them, even in the context of the challenges that we're facing. And, I absolutely say thank you to every single person that was involved. It was lovely to speak to lots of them. And an occasion that I've spoken about before, actually before the judgment, before the big celebration, was the Children in Care's barbecue. Now, that day really felt like a family day. It was the end of the summer, it was a beautiful evening, and there you saw everybody involved, the social work teams making the barbecue, our youth service giving people fun stuff to do, foster carers with their foster children and their birth children, all together, making no difference. Birth children who are teenagers, helping mum and dad look after the foster children who had come into their families, and some really complex people. But actually, I felt part of it. I felt as I should feel, and all of us around the table should feel. That's my corporate family. And I wanted, I came away from that evening wanting the very best for them, as I want for my children and grandchildren, and so did everybody there. And it was nice to see people sharing their challenges and their determination and their aspirations for all of those children. So we've shown what we can do. We will continue to do it, and we won't take our eye off the ball.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Before I go back to you, Adam, I just want to add my personal congratulations to the whole team, and it is a whole team effort. It's right and appropriate, of course, we focus those who are delivering the services day in, day out on the front line. We recognise Leanne and Dora Marriott, that senior management team, who have given me confidence as the new leader of the council. But actually, the whole council have played their role in understanding that if we don't get things like HR and IT and finance right, it stops those people on the front line. So the whole council should rightfully be proud of this. There is more to do, absolutely. The financial challenges are real and genuine. And there are, again, some national lobbying we need to do as part of that bigger voice. Part of the challenge around recruitment is this new cabal approach of saying you can't get a single social worker, you have to effectively hire a whole project team. And there's an additional premium on top of that. And of course, if that's the only thing that the market's offering you, that's a challenge. So again, we need to see some national intervention to try and make it a fairer playing field. And I do recognise there is a lot of good commentary. Tracy is right. I'm sure most people watching this, most people here tonight have read the report. If you haven't, take the time to read it. And also take the time to read 2019. Teresa is right. It's not hyperbole to say that was one of the worst days I had as a councillor, and I was in opposition at that point. How it must have felt to have been part of the administration, I fear. And as many colleagues around this table have heard me say, this was giving me sleepless nights from May the 4th. I make no apology for that. So my first meeting after the annual council on the Wednesday night was the Children's Services Improvement Board. And just to answer the question from Teresa, this Thursday at 11 o'clock, I've got the Children's Services Improvement Board. It's going nowhere. We're going to keep improving. Although we haven't got Ofsted knocking on our door every 2 minutes, we will absolutely do our very best for those vulnerable young people. They deserve that. So, yes, it's a moment to be proud. I pay tribute to Josie. I pay tribute to Clive Johnson. And as I've said elsewhere, I need Joe Halfcroft-Scott and George Perfect to be holding us to account. They'll do that through scrutiny. That's the right place to do that. And again, I think that's dramatically improved over the 4-year period since the report. All councillors now making a contribution. That certainly wasn't the case back in 2019, regrettably. And also the role of corporate parenting, and colleagues know we'll be taking a report to full council once a year on an annual basis. Again, giving that higher prominence and profile. Very, very important. So we are proud. We're proud to be Medway, and we're proud of the fact that children matter in Medway. Not my words, the words of Ofsted. Adam, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, colleagues. And also I'd like to thank everybody here for the teamwork. So it's the teamwork between us as lead members and our lead officers. And it's the continuing teamwork with our staff, and it's the continuing teamwork with other departments within the council. So democratic services have played their part in this as well. Other housing, etc. All the rest of it, all those aspects of children's lives. And so it is like very pleasing. And obviously I just want to finally just say that we've just had our second meeting of the cycle of the Medway Corporate Parenting Board earlier this evening, and we were able to finish on a very positive note, because our apprentice Sophie, that's been with us for 3 years now, has now graduated. And she also has a job working for Young Lives Foundation, and this is something else that we need to be doing for our care leavers moving out of care, making sure that they go on and they flourish elsewhere. And I know that Sophie will, and we took a very nice photograph of everybody gathered around for that. So it's that teamwork that we need to continue for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Congratulations to Sophie, who many of us would have seen at the induction process as well. She's a real strong advocate for those young people. Is the recommendation agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to agenda item 6. Update to local flood risk management strategy. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you, colleagues. I mean, it sounds a bit mundane in relation to the last two items, but actually, this is vitally important stuff. I mean, I think there's 3 elements to this work. Firstly, we are a statutory lead authority on flood defence, so we have this responsibility under law to deliver a plan of this nature. And this is the stage of the production, of the sort of revitalisation of the plan, which has to be reviewed every few years to go out to statutory consultation on that, which I'll mention more in a minute. So the Cabinet's being asked to approve the process to go to consultation. And in the process of producing a plan like this, you look at sort of 4 particular areas. You understand what the risk of flooding is. You look at the sort of how you can prevent inappropriate development causing more flooding. And we've got a huge development pressure on Medway now, as we've heard in previous meetings around our local plan consultation. The level of housing that's being required of us by the government puts more pressure on our flood defences and our drains and what's called our sustainable urban drainage systems, and that has to work properly. You manage the likelihood of flooding. You look at what the possibilities and the probabilities of flooding in different parts of Medway are, and you take account of that. And then obviously that leads to improving flood protection, prediction, warning, and the post-recovery phase, which I'll also mention. So there's a sort of technical report that is attached to this item that is well done and needs to be considered when people are looking at it from the consultation. The other element which is worth mentioning is climate change. The flood risk now in the country as a whole is greatly higher than it was 10 years ago, whether it's rising sea levels in the River Medway and floods coming up through Medway City Estate and such like, which we're seeing now, or whether it's the increased levels of rainfall. I've been talking to a few landowners in the last couple of weeks, and particularly some of the farmers have noticed how the rain patterns have changed across the southeast now. So you get a great intensity of rain for a short period of time, it floods through your land, and then it's dry for the next 6 months. And that's the kind of weather patterns we're seeing increasingly. I mean, this summer's been a bit wetter than usual, but if you remember last summer, it was incredibly dry. And then just a few weeks ago, we had a massive storm, and a lot of people ended up being flooded. So there's that climate change aspect where it's becoming much more unpredictable and difficult to cope with the way the patterns of our climate are changing. And the final element, I think, which is really crucial, is the impact it has on people's lives. I mean, as I just mentioned, just a couple of weeks ago, there was some serious flooding in a number of parts of Medway, including my own ward in Luton. And people's lives are ruined by this. I mean, it comes through your house, there's nothing you can do. At the end of it, you've got a soaking wet house that you've got to then dry out over the next several weeks, and it costs a fortune, particularly if you're not insured or whatever, to recover from all that. And there's no indication as to when it's likely to happen again, unless we have plans of this nature in place, which are properly funded and properly implemented. So that's what this process is all about. We consult with the public, obviously, so people are welcome to submit their comments on this in the next few weeks. We have a number of partnership bodies, like the Inland Drainage Board and the Southern Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, and landowners are welcome to comment, but also in relation to the parish councils and ward councillors, please talk to your residents and get your comments in on this. So that's basically what this plan is about. I'm looking forward to people having their say on it.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. Colleagues, any questions, comments? Tris.
Thank you very much, Vince, and thank you, Simon, for the paper. Flooding is, of course, a significant and ongoing risk around the country. Similar to you, I represented Luton previously, and we have seen historic floods, which have been, as a statutory body, been reported to us in Section 19 reports. And I think there's three elements that have definitely stand out. First of all, there is no doubt that climate change is leading to an increasing rate of both fluvial flooding, river flooding, and also accumulated flooding via storm events. And so that just reinforces the necessity for a net zero agenda, and that agenda needs to be held to account both locally and also nationally. And people accept that. All polling evidence suggests people are now open to engagement on that transition. And I think it's really important that we link in the strategy with this, with our other platforms around promoting green spaces, active travel in Medway, both using public transport and other types of schemes to reduce and engage people in different ways around travel as well. Secondly, learning from where we've seen floods before, and that's the real element of this which I'm really supportive of, that you've taken into account all of the flood events in Medway, and we're looking to partner with Southern Water and other agencies and bodies to ensure that we have structural approaches, not only in planning terms, but also around our roads and transport networks, and around drainage monitoring as well, around some of the storm flow elements in some of the key high-risk areas of flooding. And I note the report does review those areas in detail, providing detailed maps of where those risks are associated. And of course, those maps are now up to date. And those maps paint a picture, which is that we're seeing an increasing risk of flooding across Medway. And just thirdly, around future development, clearly we need to be mindful of the fact that we have a local plan process. And I think this is a really important paper that feeds into that plan to ensure all future development and all future development that we engage with as well is on a sustainable basis and takes into account our obligations. And I note that the programme of splashes, which we're delivering, and we're proudly delivering as a Labour authority in Raynham, is going to be one of the sort of key cornerstone projects around sustainable urban drainage systems. And those sorts of ideas need to be encouraged and promoted in all new developments. And we have that obligation as a planning authority to insist and ensure that our flood protection is adequate. And just lastly, around future provision in Strood, Riverside and other locations, many of our riverside locations are key regeneration and development areas. So there is an absolute critical nature to this, that we need to get this right, because many people in the future will be using and accessing, working and using our river for transport and other purposes. So if we don't get this right, if people don't engage with this seriously, that many thousands of residents can be impacted in a negative way. So I just reiterate the fact that we all have to take flooding and climate change seriously. This report does that. I look forward to hearing the consultation responses. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tris. Any other colleague? No, I mean, I think before I go back to you, Simon, I would say every council needs to have this. Of course, we've got the dual challenge of the flash flooding, as we've seen particularly in Luton, bits of Strood as well, alongside the fact that we've got a river. So we need to recognise both of those, and I would encourage residents, interest groups, parish councils and others to get involved, get your voice heard. If you've got a specific concern, this is your opportunity to have your say. Simon, back to you.
Yep, thank you very much. Thank you, Tris, for those comments. I mean, I think the nice thing about some of this flood work is that you can start being creative with some of your solutions. Say, nice thing, it's necessary work, and taking into account the climate change issue, we're looking at sort of what we call nature-based solutions as well. How we manage our tree stock in Medway. Trees soak up a lot of water, and so it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we plant a lot of trees, and looking at the way our river functions as well. Things like salt marshes can absorb a lot as well, and control flooding issues as well. So we're looking at that with projects on the River Medway as well. So what I would do is put to you members to recommend that the option A in the report, that we send this out to public consultation.
Thank you, Simon. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 7. Simon, back to you. Temple Marsh open space.
Thank you very much. I'll just find the right page. Let me do it quickly. Thank you, members. Thank you, Vince. This is an item regarding the area of the River Medway, just on the Strood side, opposite the Esplanade and Borstal Marsh, called Temple Marsh. This is an area which has had a long history of different proposals for it, but unfortunately it's a very difficult area to manage because of the fact that underneath it is an old rubbish tip which was closed in about the 1980s and is still gassing as we speak. So it's a tricky site for any kind of development proposals, but what it is already and has become is a popular open space for local people, and also it's a quite important wildlife site, so it's designated, or part of it's designated for its wildlife. A new development has taken place along there, built by Redrow, and they're doing in 3 phases there, and consequently, and also as a result of some deals done with the previous landowners, there's a significant amount of Section 106 funding available for this. So this isn't new money, this is ring-fence money for this site, and the idea is that we turn this area into a formal park area with its wildlife interest protected and preserved, but with walks and access for the new residents on the new housing estate, but also for anyone coming from further afield and walking along the river. It's very beautiful views. If you ever go out there, it's absolutely lovely to stand on the shore there and look out across the castle and see the other side of the river. So it's well worth it. So the Cabinet has requested to agree this development. The money is available. The plans are ready to be written. So this money will be used for a project officer. It will also be used to produce the plans themselves for the site and implement it over the next few years. And the Cabinet's being asked to take this forward as a project. And the nice thing for us as well, as we come into this new authority, one of our main pledges was to deliver green spaces and deliver on access. And this is a project which does that for the people of Strood. So I'm looking for a recommendation to go ahead with this project.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any colleagues? No? Oh, Tris, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Simon, for that. I think, first of all, I just want to put on record my thanks to the Strood councillors as well. I know they've been really actively engaged since May, so Councillor Mark Jones, Satinder Shokar, and others have been working tirelessly, really, to push this proposal, and I just want to pay tribute to my colleagues in Strood for doing that. This is really a critical proposal. It's a key area of regeneration along the river, linked in some way to the previous item, and more importantly, the river is hopefully getting more access to the river as we move forward with other proposals along the Strood riverfront to create a truly vibrant community along the riverfront, but also to allow access for residents to use the river in a better way. I know there are pathways in front of the Medway sort of cinema and other entertainment complexes, a lovely walk there for people, and what hopefully a vision in the future would be to see that extended so that we can actually get open access to some of our rivers and to get that truly enjoyable experience where people can see the best of Medway, which is our river in part. So I just want to reiterate my support and thank my colleagues in Strood for all of their hard work.
Thank you, Tris. I would agree. Sharon, Sat and Mark have been doing a great job and working closely with Simon. And it shows that even with that challenging first report we had tonight, that by using Section 106 funding, grant funding, other opportunities of that nature, we will continue to deliver not only our pledges, but beyond that, in these challenging times, because that's what a proactive Labour and Cooperative Council will do. Simon, back to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments there, Tris. There's been a lot of work by the officers and by members as well involved in this. And it's encouraging because some people often ask, what does 106 get used for? Some of this funding goes back to 2011, but it was earmarked for this project, and now finally we're making it happen, and that money is still available for use on this project. So there are three elements to the recommendation tonight. Firstly, for Cabinet to agree the development as detailed in the report. Also to note that the Chief Operating Officer will make additions to the capital programme from the various funding pots and the 106 as well. And then finally, ask to delegate authority to the Director of Place and to myself the approval of the final scheme prior to its delivery. So I ask members to agree that.
Thank you very much, Simon. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is 8 on Public Space Protection Orders, or PSPOs, on nuisance vehicles. Tris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vince, and I'm really pleased to be submitting this item. And just first, you want to pay tribute to all of the officer team in Medway Council for the absolute speedy way in which they have launched the consultation on the election, just prior to the election, also the delivery of some of these results in quick time. And I can tell you now, there has been an absolute relentless focus to get this through the process and delivered for residents. Many will be aware that antisocial behaviour and crime has risen over the last 10 years, and at a time actually when Conservatives have actually cut the police for the first 6 years under Theresa May. And we've seen reported crime in Medway rise from about 18,000 incidents to around 30,000 incidents from 2015 to date. So we know there's a significant increase in crime. A lot of incidents are reported now using social media, and many residents here and many councillors here will be aware of some of those reports. And I actually just want to pay tribute to all of those people who actually use social media and also report to the police. I think it's critical that we have that robust engagement and people being held to account on these issues. And I can say that this order is very much in demand. So the consultation response showed an overwhelming response from, and of that 90% of residents consented to additional powers. And these powers will be Medway-wide because of the nature of the order around vehicles and also giving the flexibility to our police. And it is the police that ultimately will be working in partnership with us. So I'm going to use some examples in Dartford Borough Council, who work very closely with the police. They've been working on Section 59s and other types of powers, working to issue community protection notices. And that model of working in partnership, where our officers and Kent police officers will work together, has already been trial run over the summer period. And we've seen a significant number of Section 59s and community protection notices issued to people who have been abusing our public spaces, including parks and other locations. And actually, a number of these nuisance vehicles are not insured, and many of those are dangerous and hazardous to other road users, and also dangerous and hazardous to pedestrians, and cause significant concern to residents. Many people have communicated with me and said they've witnessed these on roads and on parks around Medway. So we know that this problem is significant. I also want to just indicate that the powers themselves are not, that this may not be the end result. We might see other powers added on to these PSPOs. So having them as a Medway-wide order gives us that flexibility to do that on that basis. These orders are clearly giving powers to the police, so it is important that they are engaged with by residents, and it is important that when we consult, and we have done, that we've engaged in a process which is robust, because they can be legally challenged. So I note in other places people have been trying to get these rushed through, and I note that one or two MPs have been making comments that or implying that the council has been sitting on these proposals. I can say not only is that inappropriate comment against civil servants who work very hard for Medway, but actually unprofessional and undignified. And I would ask that when people make public comment like that, that they actually do engage in a professional way with both the council and our team, because I can say that this has been put together with as quickly as we can within the powers that we have. And just lastly, we are all here as a Labour and Cooperative Council trying to challenge antisocial behaviour. We're increasing fines for fly tipping. We've partnered with the police to get more community rehabilitation, and we're working on charging discharges. But ultimately, this does come also, we have to accept that we have a problem in our criminal justice system at the back end. This government has cut the court service, magistrate courts, and also Crown Courts, which is seeing significant delays in both throughput through courts and also magistrate fines. That is having a significant impact on policing. We're also seeing the probation service in the South East that was under national ownership going through multiple different providers and now having to be renationalised again. That has created instability in the criminal justice system. We've seen a government that's yo-yoed on police numbers. And whilst it is welcome that under the current guidance we're seeing an increase in numbers, arguably those numbers should never have been cut in the first place. And just lastly, people's expectations are not being met on the phone service and other issues. So whilst this is an element or a part of a solution, we need to be aware that this is not going to fix the problems with crime and antisocial behaviour overnight. It is a toolkit which can give police additional powers, but ultimately we need to ensure that our MPs are not cutting our police and or undermining our court services, and also ensuring adequate provision in prisons as well, which are in the spotlight at the moment. And so I welcome this report. I think it will go a long way to granting public confidence. I think these issues are of significance in Medway. The public are demanding it, and I am happy to follow the recommendations as listed in 1.1 and 1.2 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tris. I've got Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Tristan, and I appreciate the laser focus that you've had on this since we came into administration, and I had to laugh really when I heard the MP for Rochester and Strood making a sort of half-hearted attempt in Parliament to say the council was dragging its feet. She'd had the previous 10 years to speak to people in the administration, and indeed had a meeting with Vince and I just a couple of months ago when she didn't mention a word about it. Anyway, it's an irrelevance because the work that you've done, backed up by officers, has actually made the difference. And I agree with you that defaming people who are working hard to make something happen is a pretty shallow thing to do. This is a really detailed paper. It gives us the all of the legal detail, but it's easy to read and to understand. And importantly, it shows how much the public are behind this. We've had nuisance vehicles in our ward, as you know, and they can be really disturbing to people's peace and quiet. And actually, I worry a lot about the people who are using the nuisance vehicles. Very often, if it's mopeds, not wearing any safety equipment, as you say, not being insured, which, if there is an accident, can be terrible for everybody involved in the accident, even if someone else who gets hurt actually is insured. It makes it difficult to make a claim. So I think this sends a very strong message that we're not prepared to put up with this and that there are measures that we're prepared to take. But I think it goes hand in hand with work that we can do in schools and with Kent Fire and Rescue and the police themselves in directing young people not to get involved in this kind of thing. And I think, you know, as much as we've got to have a punitive agenda, we need a preventative agenda as well, that's about people keeping themselves safe. And if they want to learn to drive, then they need to understand what their responsibilities are. And I know that at Kent Fire and Rescue's site up at Horsted, they've got a really good simulation suite there that is used by Mid-Kent College and other people, that shows young people the risks associated with staying outside of the law with driving. And I think that's a very useful resource, and one that I hope we can make use of in tandem with this. But on the whole, this sends a very clear message. We're not prepared to allow people to break the law, and we don't want other people to suffer the bad effects of antisocial behaviour. And I commend everybody who's worked really hard to bring this forward quickly.
Thank you very much indeed. Teresa, Simon?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you, Tris, for bringing this. I know the amount of work that's gone in and the persistence that you've put into making this happen, and it's really welcome. I just wanted to emphasise one of the points. I mean, obviously, my own favourite area, one of my favourite areas is the green spaces that we have in Medway, and the damage that this causes, this nuisance vehicles cause on green spaces is quite considerable. And often, I mean, we talk about it being a young people's problem, but it's not just that. A lot of older people are doing this as well, or they're buying the vehicles for their children to do it and things like that. So it's about a family decision often, that they'll get the vehicle and then say, oh, you can take it where you like, nobody minds. And then we end up with problems like we have at Barnfield, which are persistently causing us problems over many years, where people just don't seem to care. And one of the conditions of this PSPOs, get it right, is about the detrimental effect it has on people's lives. And it really does. The noise on a Sunday for the people who live near Barnfields, and the fact that they can't use their own green space right near their homes and go for a walk, all that kind of thing is destroyed and disrupted by this irresponsible behaviour. So this is really welcome action that you've taken, and it's going to be a lot more benefit to Medway as a consequence of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Before I come back to you, Tristan, a couple of points from myself. Look, I want to say loud and clear, this Labour and Cooperative Administration want people to play by the rules. We'll support you when you play by the rules. When you don't, we'll make the system work as hard as it can to make you realise you should be playing by the rules. Secondly, the Leader of the Opposition is in the room tonight. Myself and him were at a public meeting in Gillingham before the election. And quite openly, and fair play to him for saying this, the Police and Crime Commissioner was quite clear that last year, I think, I don't want to misquote him, I think the exact quote was, 101 was rubbish last year. I think that was his exact quote. So a recognition that there's a massive problem. And why is that important to this item? Because we'll have residents who have put up with this, and we've brought this forward working with partners, and I'm really pleased, and I'm sure it will receive cross-party support at full council when it gets there. So from that perspective, if someone sat there last year and gone, I've waited 45 minutes to talk to someone on 101, I can't be bothered, we need to say loud and clear from this meeting, we need residents to be reporting stuff in. And we can say now, after this goes through its process, the maximum amount of tools available from this administration to work in partnership with the police, in partnership with some of those community groups that look out for this, Speed Watch and others. They'll be playing their part in this because they're vigilant for their communities. We're going to do all that we can, and we need residents to support us in that as we move forward. So I pay tribute to the officers and yourself, Tris, who've brought this forward in very quick time. Again, once showing this administration is not hanging around, we're getting on with stuff. So I'm very pleased to support you on this. Back to you, Tris.
Yes, thank you, Vince, and thank you, colleagues, for your contributions. And just three things to respond to people's contributions. First of all, we have absolutely pursued this as quickly as possible. Officers have spent hours ensuring that all of the safeguards and legal processes are robust and subject to no challenge. And in addition to that, when you're increasing police powers, it is appropriate that you are engaging across all stakeholders to ensure that those powers are the powers that are demanded. Second of all, just to reiterate, and I know I mentioned this, this will not stop the problem overnight. This is part of a toolkit which we can give to the police and other authorities, and we have already and are already using it. So as I mentioned, over the summer, we've been partnering with Kent Police and our officers to issue community protection notices and a large number of Section 59s, and we will continue to do that. But ultimately, we do need all of the parts of the criminal justice system to work for this to be robust. And I include in that education of our young people as well. There is some elements of a culture around biking, off-road biking as well. And I think some of that needs to be challenged in online places and other places as well, because it does cause a misery to significant numbers of residents and accidents and potential other issues. It is not unique to Medway, but it's certainly a problem in Medway. And so I think us tackling this problem head on is the right course of action. But ultimately, we need our criminal justice system to also function robustly to ensure that those perpetrators who are caught, their vehicles are confiscated, that they're issued the notices, and that they serve community penalties if they fail to accept responsibility for their actions. We'll be working and partnering with the police and other bodies on the Community Safety Partnership to make sure that occurs. So thank you for all your support.
Thank you, Tris. Are the recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is the annual review of school place planning strategy 22 to 27. Tracy, over to you.
Thank you. As I'm sure you're aware, Medway has a statutory duty to provide sufficient school places, and this strategy outlines the progress made during the lifetime of the school place planning strategy and makes recommendations to ensure that the appropriate levels of good quality school places are available through to 2027. This involves forecasting what might happen in the future, and this is done taking into account birth rates, housing developments, inward migration. It's a complex process, and we don't just need school places, we need them in the right place. So this strategy has set out a number of recommendations to be made to ensure that we fulfil our statutory obligation to provide these spaces. In section 1.1, it shows the recommendations that are required, and this ranges from extending dining capacity in some schools to repurposing, for example, the previous school site at Stoke, which will ensure that we are able to meet the capacity in future years. The proposals in section 11 and section 13 of this annual review follow the school place planning strategy principles, and if approved, it shows how they would be delivered through available funding from the Education Capital Programme, comprising of central government capital grants and section 106 funding. This annual review report and the recommendations in it are based upon the annual round of forecasting, which this year was undertaken in April, using the latest available data. Appendix 1 sets out the forecasts for the various mainstream and secondary planning areas, and Appendix 2 sets out the forecasts for the SEND places. By approving the recommendations in section 1 of the report, the Cabinet will be able to make sure that the Council meets its statutory duty to ensure that sufficient and appropriate good quality school places are available in both mainstream and specialist provision. I therefore move the recommendations as laid out in section 1.1 of the report.
Thank you very much indeed, Tracy. Any other colleague on this? Adam, please.
Yes, just to say that obviously this is like projecting all of the needs that we have for school places in the future. So that does include the more like statutory nature of school place provisions. So that includes places for our children with special educational needs, also alternative like provision. And obviously we've got the Beaches School, which is going to be coming on stream, which is going to be managed by the Rowans. So I just wanted to allude to that. And also not forgetting grammar schools as well. We're also looking at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Any other Teresa?
Yeah, and thank you, Adam and Tracy. And I think this is a complex piece of work, isn't it? And I understand the sensitivities around predicting need. It's a difficult thing to do and requires the assembly of lots of information. And I think it's important to pay tribute to all of our schools, those who have taken bulge classes, who have adjusted their provision to help us cope with that rising number of children that are going into secondary now. And Adam, it's important that you have mentioned what the report says about grammar schools, because whilst it's a difficult and complex thing to do, there are moves that can be made, and actually I welcome the change of criteria to include locality as well as the 11+, because I think that's fairer on all of the children in Medway who want to come here and take advantage of the range of secondary school places that we've got. So I look forward to this being a baseline strategy, and I think it's particularly important that there's special attention for those with special educational needs, because, as is well known, the more that we can accommodate people with those kinds of needs nearer to home, the more we can accommodate them in mainstream, the greater their chances are of achieving integration, enjoying a school life with all of the other children and being successful at the end of it. So I think it's a really important report that has taken a lot of work and actually a lot of courage to make those predictions and overseen by both of you. I feel confident that it's going to turn the results that are set out in the recommendation.
Thank you very much indeed. Tris.
Thank you very much, Vince and colleagues. I just want to draw members' attention, Cabinet members, to 6.5, because clearly this paper does take into account future projections around increasing students, and there is an obligation for us around the local plan as well to mitigate and plan for that. But concerning is the fact that we receive no basic need funding from government, and they're using outdated figures potentially to settle with pupil funding numbers as well. And that's something which absolutely needs to be updated, because all of our students deserve adequate funding, and funding should be based on the numbers of actual students that are currently in schools rather than on previous projections. And government not stepping up and accepting responsibility for that is also leading local authorities into a shortfall, where they're having to make up the gaps in capital through Section 106 receipts, which is not a sustainable position. And those Section 106 receipts should actually be used for other community assets, as opposed to things which government should be stepping in and dealing with. I also want to just talk about some of the grammar school system. So the issue with selective education has recently come up, and it's really disappointing that our grammar schools went through an entire consultation process around allowing mixed entry into our grammar schools, which has actually been stopped by the Conservative-led Department for Education. And this is now leading to significant cost increase for those schools now to have to go out to consultation through trusts. And it just shows once again that this government pays lip service to grammar schools in Medway when they say that they stand up for them, and yet over 13 years they've dithered over multiple policy positions around whether to have more or fewer of them. And now we're in a position where we don't have certainty around equality of access for young men and young women going into our grammar schools. And so I think that position is also not accepted by me, and I think that they need to, our grammar schools deserve better than that, and they deserved an apology from our MPs and a commitment from them that they would work to resolve this. And as yet, I've not heard whether they are working to resolve this issue with the Department for Education. And just lastly, I remember in previous years similar reports coming forward that led to closures of primary schools previously in 2010, 2005 to 2010 period, and that was an extremely messy process based on data which was not particularly well thought through. So I'm just really happy to see that we have learnt lessons from prior years around forecasting numbers. This is never an exact art because you don't know when houses will be built, but I think that there is a general acceptance with in-migration coming from outside the area that we are due to, that the forecasts are robust, and that we're not looking at rushed processes to close schools when we actually had a requirement for schools. So I'm just happy to see that this process is robust, and it's looking at expanding our education provision both for SEN students and other students as well. And I'm welcoming the commitment to many of our trusts in Medway to see and expand those provisions as well, partnering with the council. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tris. Simon?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this report. It's a really good piece of work and a huge amount of effort and detail gone into producing it. I just wanted to highlight one issue in particular, which is around transport and the problems that we've got with that. I mean, obviously, it's only a few months ago that the government pulled our Housing Infrastructure Fund, and the consequences of that and the fact that we can't do the works on the roads and transport that money was going to be used for, we've got to find other provision for that somewhere else. We haven't been told that we're going to get any less housing. We've just got to find the money for the infrastructure for that housing from wherever, a magic money tree perhaps, I don't know. But the problem that we have around transport is highlighted every single day with the congestion at between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning and between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. All across Medway, everybody complains about the congestion that's causing us problems, the condition of our roads, the lack of infrastructure funding for decades, the previous authorities' complete ignorance of the fact that we did have a bus service in Medway once, and it's completely degraded and it's not really fit for purpose at the moment. And that's thanks to the previous authority not bothering with it. We are now trying to rebuild that structure, buses and public transport in Medway, but we're starting from a low base. We've got our active travel group up and running now, which will be looking not just at walking and cycling, but also at the public transport side of things and buses in particular. But we've also got our School Streets initiative, encouraging people to walk to schools and keep the polluting vehicles away from our young children, which cause so many lung problems for them later in life. So this is a really welcome piece of work. There's a lot more behind it that needs to be done, particularly around transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no other colleague, before I go back to Tracy, Tristan picked up on the point I wanted to raise, which was this council, before the election, supported unanimously the position of the changes to the 3 grammar schools to go to a co-educational position. It is utterly frustrating that the regional director has taken the position they have, completely unfounded in my view. And I know that I'm sure the 3 schools involved, in particular the 3 trusts, will be far more than just frustrated. It's put to a real risk some of their planning they would have been making quite legitimately on the basis that everyone was supportive of the process so far. So I agree with your analysis there, Tris, on that particular issue. And more widely, look, this is really important. We know where this goes wrong, we end up with excessive levels of bulge classes, etc. As others have said, schools do the very best they can in sometimes challenging circumstances. We want to try and manage that appropriately. We've got obviously things like the Maritime Academy coming on board soon with its building, but it's not there yet. And of course, having that in that kind of interim position goes back to the challenges that Simon raised around transport. So it's a welcome report, but always there's, of course, more to be done. Tracy, back to you.
Thank you. And I absolutely take your point about the grammar schools, the 3 grammar schools that wanted to move to co-education. This has an impact not just on grammar school pupils, because when the move is made, our Medway grammar schools will be able to take more Medway students, which means there will be more capacity in our non-selective schools, taking a bit of pressure off this really complex issue. I do thank very much the schools who have been immensely cooperative in accommodating bulge classes, making extra space for pupils. It's a very, very difficult thing to get right. Of course, some areas of Medway are much more difficult to expand schools in because there simply isn't enough space. And often these are the areas where we most need the spaces. And this does come again to Simon's point about making sure that we've got the transport for these pupils, because when these are the cases, often children do not get places in schools that are near enough for them to walk to and take sustainable transport. So it's very important that we do get the right number of places for children where they need them. I therefore would like to move the recommendations as laid out in section 1.1 of the report so that we can ensure that we provide sufficient school places in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Those recommendations agreed, colleagues?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is on the important issue of infant feeding strategy 23 to 28. Teresa, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And I'm really pleased to be introducing this report to everybody, and I hope that you will support it. It follows the strategy that we had in 2018 and actually makes a lot of moves to modernise and change the strategy to accommodate the way that people are living now, the different needs of our population. And I'll be pleased to share with you some of the very community-based work that's gone on. But first of all, it's important to acknowledge not just that we want all children to have the best start in life, but that this strategy is intended to be supportive, not punitive. If there are mothers who are not able to breastfeed, they deserve absolutely as much support as we can give them. And the strategy is very, very clear on that. But as far as ensuring that everybody feels comfortable about breastfeeding, that's where the new pieces of work have been done. And the strategy is jointly dependent on the work of the NHS and the work of Medway Community Health, because it has to start even in pregnancy. so that people understand the importance of breastfeeding and feel as comfortable and as supportive as possible to start that process. And I do commend Scott Elliott and his team, who've done some really good work in actually going right out to the community, working in cafes and other social spaces, explaining to people why it's important to have a comfortable and non-judgmental environment for feeding children at all, and especially for breastfeeding. And that really granular work has been done in spite of the challenges that we're facing with budgetary issues right across all of the services I've just mentioned. Some money has been found to pay peer supporters, and that means that at least the peer supporters have got support for transport when they want to go and see other people who are breastfeeding, and that they can go to some of the places that are badging themselves very consciously and very deliberately as breastfeeding friendly social situations. I'm delighted to say that when we had the Health and Wellbeing Board, we looked at the strategy in detail. Everybody there was completely supportive, and we had colleagues from the ICB pledging their support and making sure that the resources go into all of the services. And that really granular work to make sure that in our local area there's plenty of support is important, because we've got a lower than the rest of England rate of breastfeeding, and the lowest rates are amongst young women in our most deprived wards. And those children really need as much support as we can possibly give them, to give them the best start in life. Breastfeeding can improve mental well-being, it improves family bonding right across the family, and also it starts off that really important early commitment to sensible eating strategies. So the more we can do to encourage families that without fear or favour, this is something that they can get involved in, and that dads and everyone else can support, it's really important. I'm very pleased to say that some additional work has been done since the paper was written on our website, which is called Beside You. It's a really easy to use website that allows navigation to where you can find breastfeeding support groups, where you can find the breastfeeding friendly social spaces to share, and it's got lots and lots of easy to read information and testimonials from people who've been supported to help people think about what it actually takes and take the fear and worry out of the life changes that they can have. So I'd recommend everybody here recommending our Beside You site to people. It starts with information for pre-pregnancy and pregnancy, and goes right across the spectrum. And in addition to that, the council is working on a return to work strategy, so that women who are still breastfeeding but want to return to work have all of the facilities and space and other things that they might need to be able to continue to do that. So I think it's something we can be very proud of. It absolutely accords with our joint aspiration to have a healthy start in Medway, and some really good work has been done in encouraging everybody to think about this, including businesses and all sorts of spaces. So that work will be ongoing, and the peer supporters are sort of continuously recruited, and we've got some more kind of momentum through the Start for Life project as well, so that through the family hubs we can do even more work on including healthy feeding for infants. So I ask everybody please to support the recommendations, where we're noting the comments and approving the Infant Feeding Strategy 2023 to 2028 as attached to Appendix A to the report, please.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Any colleagues, any comments, questions? I say just had a good hearing at the Health and Wellbeing Board, and I know the feedback was positive on this, and I would absolutely echo your comments around the public health team and Scott Elliott in particular. This can sometimes be a sensitive matter, so pitching the communications and language needs to be spot on, and I think this council's got a good track record in this particular area. If there's no other comments, we'll move to the recommendations. Are those agreed? Thank you, colleagues. Let's move on to item 11. I say reminder, item 11 and 12 have got confidential papers, but I don't think we'll stray into those areas tonight as far as I'm expecting. So item 11, Gateway 3 Contract Award for the Medway VCS Better Together Consortium. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you. And it's important to remind colleagues that the recommendations are agreeing to award the contracts as set out in the confidential papers, but I don't intend to go into the detail of that tonight. Suffice to say, you can see that this is a huge procurement with a contract value of over £5 million. And I pay tribute to Mary Coldham in the Senior Commissioner for the Partnership and Commissioning Adults, to Sue Irvine as part of that team, and everybody working in procurement. This is a complicated activity to undertake, and I've done a lot of work actually with the teams in understanding their work and giving me the assurance that the process is as stable and as accessible as it can possibly be to all the people who want to bid for these contracts, that the elements of social value are properly attended to, so that all of the providers actually contribute to the things that we want to happen in our community, and that we try our very best to make the process as smooth as possible, because we're very aware that for people, for everyone that works in the voluntary sector, our very valued partners, that actually applying for contracts like this can be an organisationally disruptive process. And I feel assured that the team have done as much as they can to prevent it from being too disruptive, and where appropriate to award longer contracts than were initially set out, if that's appropriate to do, all the time monitoring the way that the contracts are being delivered and making sure that we get best value, not just for the council in monetary terms, but for everybody in our community. So you can see the 4 lots there. Support for the voluntary and community sector organisations in Medway, Health Watch, information for carers, that very important group, and a very specific contract there, supporting and giving information to children and adults who are visually impaired. So I'm satisfied that this has been an iterative process, that people have had enough information as they've come forward for bidding, and that they've, you know, as much as they've wanted to, they've had access to our teams to understand what they need to do to put a bid in and what they need to do going forward. So I congratulate all of those who have been awarded a contract, and I look forward to working with them as time goes on, and absolutely to hear their feedback on the process and the way that things have gone.
Thank you, Teresa. Any colleague? I think the thing I would add into this, and it's an important procurement because it's some of that frontline voluntary sector stuff which our residents truly value, is actually the information in paragraph 8. You know, some of those positive changes around carbon, some of those positive changes around, you know, increasing levels of apprenticeships and internships, making sure that we as a council are getting the best value for money, not just from a kind of pounds and pence sense, but the best value for our community, whether that's environment or upskilling our residents through those programmes. So I do welcome that within our procurement process. It's critical and it should absolutely continue. If there's no other colleague on this, we'll move to the recommendations. Are those agreed? Thank you, which takes us to the last substantive item tonight, which is, again, a Gateway 3 contract award for health visiting and school nursing services. Teresa, back to you.
Thank you. So this is a statutory service, and colleagues will note that this is the 3rd time it's come back to Cabinet for various reasons. Sometimes the complexity of the contract itself, concerns about ensuring continuity with this contract, which has been absolutely critical. But I'm satisfied now that all of the things that needed to be done have been done. A provider is in place. We've got those key services included, as you can see, at paragraph 3.2.6. Integrated public health nursing, which is health visiting and nursing for children of school age, delivering the Healthy Child programme for families, services for vulnerable parents, the National Child Measurement programme, absolutely critical to understand childhood obesity and support people who might be affected by that, infant feeding coordinator and network, oral health promotion, a huge promotion that's been happening this year. And I'm very pleased to say, actually, outside of this, we have actually got some mobile dentistry services coming into Medway in shortage areas to provide access to NHS dentists, which is very, very welcome because that is a real area of shortage and important work. And the tongue tie service, funded on this occasion by the ICB, which is a critical service to help children latch on properly when they're born and first start feeding. So a whole bundle of very important things within this contract, and I do give my thanks to Ailish and the team in public health who have brought this together, because it hasn't actually been an easy process. We're not overweighted with bidders to take on these very complex things, but we have got someone, and there will be continuity in all of the services, which is absolutely critical to maintaining the health of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Any colleague? No, as we say, we've spoken about this 3 times already, so comments have been made. Can we therefore move the recommendations? Are they agreed? Thank you, colleagues. That means tonight's Cabinet meeting is closed. Thank you.